Next up is a great opportunity to share ways that our agriculture community can help with climate change, and of course how our agriculture community can help feed the world's growing population. And I am joined by Keith Halliday. He's a senior director with Boston Consulting Group and the Centre for Canada's Future. Welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Hello, Derek. Thanks for inviting me.
Let's first of all talk a little bit about the Boston Consulting Group that you're a part of. Give us a little background on the group.
Well, we're a global consulting firm with offices in over 90 countries around the world and all regions of Canada. And we do business advising senior private sector and public sector leaders on big issues. And that's what got us into this agriculture topic, because we were talking to friends at RBC and the Arrell Food Institute at the University of Guelph. And food is so fundamental, obviously, for survival, but also for social, friends and family. But it's also a huge economic driver. And as climate change starts to come towards us, we thought, hey, let's double click here and see what's going on with Canadian agriculture from an economic sense and a climate change sense, and also all these exciting new technologies that are emerging. So that's sort of where we're from and what sparked this study we've just published.
Well, let's talk about, first of all, then, you mentioned those two things. Let's talk about its significance when it comes to Canada's economy.
Yeah, well, it's absolutely huge. I mean, I think we all forget, those of us like me that live in cities, how much farming happens in Canada, and we're such a huge power globally. $75 billion worth of exports. We are among the top countries in canola, wheat, beef, lentils, the list goes on. So it's hugely economically important. It's a little bit different in every part of Canada, the prairies versus southern Ontario versus Quebec and the Maritimes and so on, but a really fundamental economic driver. And when you think about the increasing requirements around climate change, Canada has a ambition to get to net zero by 2050, significant reductions by 2030, which is just 7 or 8 growing seasons away.
Right.
This is a big challenge, and those two things are coming together in a really interesting way that has a lot of challenges and a lot of opportunities too.
So, Keith, for people that aren't familiar with how agriculture affects climate change, give us an idea of you mentioned greenhouse gas emissions. How much does agriculture produce in this country when it comes to those emissions?
Yeah, so we looked at it right along the chain, right? Because you start with making the fertilizer, which can emit carbon dioxide as they take the natural gas and turn it into fertilizer. Then you've got the farming, you've got the tractors, the heat sources. You've also got the land emitting carbon as the soil is disturbed or the fertilizer goes into it. And then, of course, you've got all the trucking and rail and processing, and energy that goes into processing the food later. So we looked at the main chunk of that chain, and it's about 93 megatons, which is more than 10% of Canada's total. So it's a very significant part of our carbon emissions. And it's also going to be, a very challenging one to get down lower. If you have a big oil refinery or a big steel mill, that's one large facility. There's 200,000 farmers in Canada, so it's very distributed, and it's a big challenge to figure out how to keep producing food to feed ourselves, but also the world's growing population, which is going to hit 10 billion. That's 2 billion more people on the planet that will need to eat by 2050. So Canada has an obligation and an opportunity to supply those folks with food while at the same time reducing our carbon emissions.
And Keith, I imagine technology is a big part of these solutions. What sort of technology have sort of come into play in the last few years, and what are we looking at moving forward in the next few?
Well, I think this was one of the most interesting aspects of our study, Derek, because, I think a lot of people have an image of Canadian farms as being sort of the red barn and the old tractor. But if you go talk to farmers, which our colleagues at RBC did for this very interesting RBC Disruptors podcast they put out, you see that these are very sophisticated businesses. There are farmers, they have probes in the soil, they have computer models, sophisticated precision agriculture. So there's a whole bunch of technology that Canadian farmers are already deploying that have had, dramatic impacts on productivity in a good way, and also already starting to reduce carbon emissions. But when you look at the next generation of things, there's things like anaerobic digesters, which are going to take manure and turn that into renewable natural gas to feed in to heat your house. And then even farther out, there's cellular agriculture, advanced plant genetics. One of our co-authors, Dr. Evan Fraser from Guelph, he's written a book called Dinner on Mars, which sort of talks about how, he used Mars as an example, but in the future in Canada, we may very well be eating, for example, salmon that is grown in a stainless steel tank rather than caught in the ocean. So there is just a huge amount of technology change happening out there. And the most exciting thing of it all is that a whole bunch of these great global ideas that are going to change the whole world are coming out of Canadian universities, whether that's Guelph, Manitoba, UBC, others. And the Canadian startups and companies that are pushing these ideas, very exciting business opportunities and very exciting opportunities for young Canadians to get into those in terms of jobs.
Keith, you mentioned that net zero target. With the pace that we're going at right now, how realistic is that target, do you think?
Yeah, there's lots of models out there. There's a huge amount of uncertainty, and even if you put the exact targets and the exact dates to one side, what's clear is that in order to achieve them, we need to start making a difference now. We can't wait until the late 2030s or 2040s to do it. And because farming is so distributed and you have to make big investments to change how people farm the land, how the food's processed, these investments have to start now. So one of the calls to action in our report is a ramp up of investment by the private sector and also by governments in helping farmers, move towards these new technologies and these new ways of doing business. Because I think it's critical that we don't expect the farmers to carry the full freight of all these changes, because there's expensive investments and also expensive operating expenses involved, and it's got to be sort of a shared burden by us as a nation.
Yeah, and this has been rather controversial. We've seen it in the media, the response from some of the farmers. What have we heard from farmers? I know they're certainly concerned because they're used to their traditional ways.
Yeah, so it's been really interesting to speak to farmers because, many of them have been committed for years, have been doing practices like regenerative agriculture, cover cropping and so on for a long, long time, and have been working hard to reduce fertilizer use, use energy more efficiency, reduce the carbon emissions of their food. And Canada already is, our preliminary analysis suggests, very competitive from a carbon point of view compared to other agricultural countries.
Right.
So the farmers have done a lot already, which I think a lot of people don't always give them credit for. But there are big challenges coming forward.
Keith, really appreciate the time today. Thanks so much for joining us. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back with more after this.
Thank you.